Hello everyone and welcome back to another Wizard101 video. Today, I figured that I would go over a video idea I got recommended in my Discord and one that I've kind of done in the past that I thought was interesting, and that is fixing useless spells in this game. Now, what I've decided I'm going to do for this video and kind of what I want to do is I want to go to each Wizard101 school, choose one spell in their arsenal that I think is rather useless and will just never be used, and then I want to go over how to fix that, or whether it's even worth fixing, and how it could be used in combat, because there are a lot of spells in this game that are just blatantly not useful in combat. Now, one thing I'm going to say real quick is this video will not include any stunning spells. Now, the reason for this is that if that was included, I would have to put stunning spells on every single one of these schools, because stunning spells are completely useless in this game in PvE. Almost every enemy in this entire game is stun immune, and realistically, it's just not even worth trying it. I would say that, like, most schools that have that stunning spell, I believe Fire, Ice, and Myth all have one that just stuns the enemy. All of those would be the most useless spell. But I'm going to try to ignore that and focus on some other spells in their arsenal. So without further ado, let's get into it. Starting off with Fire, we have a spell that has existed in the game for a very long time, but only recently actually gained any effect, and that spell is Tranquilize. And there's also a mega version of Tranquilize. Basically, for 2 pips, it pacifies on self for 1 round. What that means and what that kind of does is it makes it so that things can't attack you. That is what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to pacify the enemy. Now, there's actually 2 problems with this spell, I would say. The first one is the fact that up until, I believe, last year or within this recent year, this spell literally didn't even work. And in fact, it looks like it might not even work unless he fizzled because I had Pacify on. It's possible. Let's test this theory. But up until about a year ago, this spell literally did not even work. It didn't even do anything as far as I know, and that's kind of whack. A spell that doesn't even do anything, and you can see here actually it still doesn't do anything. Pacify literally does nothing. Unless that negated the damage? No, it didn't. So basically this spell does nothing. What this spell is supposed to do is it's supposed to prevent enemies from being able to attack you and prevent them from attacking you in general. But it would appear that that is not the case, as you can see there by that little test battle. So this spell is useless. What would I do to make it actually useful and worth using in combat? Well, first thing I'll say is this probably shouldn't even be a fire spell. The reason why I say that is that fire never really has any reason why it wouldn't want to be attacked, especially like earlier game, and you probably wouldn't use this late game. The reason for that is that fire has decently high health compared to, say, like storm, and decent resist at least early game, and that would make it rather pointless to have a spell like this. Another reason why you wouldn't use this spell, and probably the bigger reason, is that it costs 2 pips. I don't know if you saw when I was using it, but it costs 2 pips. Mega Tranquilize costs 3 pips. The reason why this isn't useful and this sucks is that it is wasting that full 2 pips that you would use it. You would use this spell early game especially, and 2 pips in that early game is nigh necessary. So you're wasting 2 pips on a spell that doesn't work. So what I would do for this spell is fix it in 2 ways. First off, lower the pip cost. It should definitely either cost 0 pips or it should cost 1 pip. It's as simple as that. As for the actual effect itself, you need to make it so that things literally cannot attack you or do any kind of status effects or whatever on that round. They should not be able to target you because they are pacified towards you. So I'm going to put that as the first spell on this list, and we'll move on to Ice. All right, so next up we have Ice, and this one I could have said, you know, stunning. I could have said, say, taunt, because I don't think taunt particularly works either, but instead I'm actually going to put it as a spell that is part of their main arsenal, which I genuinely think should be a lot better, and that is Snow Angel. Now, the reason why I say this and the reason why I picked Snow Angel is because Snow Angel realistically is extremely underpowered for what I think it should be. Now, what exactly is Snow Angel if for some reason you haven't played Ice? Basically, it does a base like 80 damage, and and then 600 overtime. Now, the problem with this is that 600 overtime is not a lot. In fact, it's actually pretty weak. Obviously, with an enchant, it does 800 overtime, but I would say this spell realistically isn't that useful in a lot of cases. In most cases, you're going to want that first strong base damage, and then you're going to want a bit less of an overtime. That is what I would strongly recommend for a lot of spells. But on top of this, the damage isn't nearly as good as I think it should be. I think that second half should be 800 at base. Enchanted should be around 1,000, right? I personally just think there's that. And then on top of that, the kind of icing on the cake, the pièce de résistance, is the fact that the spell animation takes a very long time. You can see there, that spell animation took like a solid 20-25 seconds or whatever, and that's on 2 enemies. If there was more enemies, this would have taken a very long time. And overall, I would just say Snow Angel is kind of bad in a lot of cases. So how would I fix it? Well, again, I would say add more base damage to that. I would make it probably 50 plus 800 or 810, somewhere around there. Make it similar to what Rain of Fire is. And I know that obviously Rain of Fire is 1 more pip, but I don't think that that should matter. I think that Snow Angel is actually pretty weak compared to what you'd expect for an overtime spell. Overtime spells usually have a much higher base damage if you add it up, while this one kind of just stays in line with what you'd expect from an 8-pip spell. If not, it's slightly weaker than the average 8-pip spell. So I would up its damage quite a little bit there. And on top of that, I would just make its spell animation time less, because no one wants to watch a spell animation for that long. So that's what I would say I would do for Snow Angel and Ice's most useless spell. All right, so next up is Storm. So I can't actually play on a Storm and do the whole battle thing because I, as you may know, do not have any Storm Wizards. So I can't do it, but I can at least give you some spells that I think are pretty useless and need a bit of fixing. And I will say there is 2 major ones that comes to mind for Storm. The first one, and this is in their base arsenal, is Wild Bolt. Now I will say this one realistically isn't that bad, and it's not necessarily a spell that can be fixed. It's a spell that kind of does exactly what its purpose is, and that is to be unpredictable and in most cases largely useless. The reason why I'd say not to use Wild Bolt is obviously it's just that unpredictable. If you get 10 damage, well, you're screwed. If you get the 1,000, wow, that's really good. But again, if you don't get it, you're screwed. So realistically, Wild Bolt is kind of useless in that regard, but there is really no way to fix it. So I will say that's not what I'm going to include on this list. What I would say right now is probably one of their most useless spells, and this is kind of a newer edition, so I figured I'd just include it anyway, is the new spell Berry Surprise. If you don't know, this is from one of the new packs. I believe the Ravenwood Ranger pack is what it's dropped from. Basically, it's a spell that either does 525 damage or heals you for 525 healing. The reason why I'd say this is useless is as a Storm, you're really never going to want that healing, in my opinion. If you are a Storm, it's just not worth it to heal yourself. You're going to want to use your pips for attacks, and that chance of potentially not doing damage and healing yourself is just not very good. Not to mention the spell in of itself just isn't really that good, I would say. So I would say that's one of the more useless spells, and there isn't really a way to fix it beyond just the fact of removing the healing part of it, which I think would remove the entire aspect of the spell. So realistically, there's no way to fix it, but I would say that that's probably one of their more useless spells. All right, next up is Life. And I would say Life doesn't actually have too many useless spells in their arsenal. I'm sure there's some out there, but as someone who's not very experienced in Life, I don't really know all the ins and outs of their spells. So I can only go based on what I have and what I'm, working on. But I will say that I do genuinely think Life has more useful spells in their arsenal than most schools do. So I kind of just had to pick a spell that I think is pretty useless that could be useful if it was in the right hands, and that is Guidance. Now, I'm sure most people don't even know what spell that is. They're like, Noah, what the heck is Guidance? Well, it's this spell right here. Plus 20 accuracy to all friends. Now, this is a spell that I have literally never seen used a single time in this game, but could actually be pretty good early game if you're on a Life and you're duoing with someone, or you're just questing with a large group of people, because realistically, a lot of schools do fizzle a lot early game, and that would really help in a lot of cases. This spell isn't even more like a useless spell, it's more just an underutilized spell, I would say. But how would I recommend making the spell more useful and more worth using is probably just making it 0 pips. I don't think this spell really needs to be 1 pip personally. It could, I mean, it's fine that it is, but I just don't see the point. I feel like this is similar to like a blade, right? Where it should probably be 0 pips. I'd say the reason why this is 1 pip is that it's to all friends, but I would say that early game, there's really no reason for this to cost 1 pip. So this is just what I'd recommend for life. I'm sure that there's some other spells in their arsenal that I could have included and probably would have fit better, but this is just one that caught my eye, right? Because you've never seen anyone use this. So let me know what you think about life in the comments below. Like, what do you think is their most useless spell? Because I'm curious, you know. I don't think life has that many useless spells in their arsenal, but that's just me. But whatever, let's move on to the next school. All right, next up we have Myth. In Myth, I could choose literally so many spells for. The sheer amount of useless spells they have is quite ridiculous. Now, I could say so many things for Myth. I could say Pacify. I could say their stunning spell. I could say Mystic Colossus. Mystic Colossus is pretty bad as well. There's so many spells for Myth that I could say, but instead I'm just gonna blanket term and say one thing, and that is minions. Now, I'm sure a lot of people probably saw this coming, and I've said this a lot in the past, but minions are incredibly useless in PvE. I know in PvP they're slightly more useful, and actually they're a lot more useful, but that doesn't mean in PvE they're useful. I think that they need a complete rework in PvE in a lot of cases, and I would say that there are a few ways they could go about it. For me personally, I would think it would be cool if you could physically control them, like you could click on their kind of name at the bottom and then use a spell directly from them. And I think this would be cool if it was a Myth specific power, because obviously Myth is known to be able to kind of conjure things and control the conjuration. I think it would be really cool if that was a Myth specific thing. But if that was too specific, I would say just make the minions slightly more useful, like make them have some kind of AI that's smart, like maybe potentially give them something like Star Wars The Old Republic where you can give them a role, like make it so that, you know, they don't use all your feints, or make it so that they blade you or they heal you, something along those lines, right? It would just be useful to have that ability to tell them what to do. So if not in a direct way, it'd be cool if you could just select a combat role. This is what I would say Myth needs the most right now, especially since Myth's main aspect, especially early game, is those minions. It just kind of sucks the fact that minions suck, right? And I do really wish that they were better. So I would say that is probably Myth's most useless feature. But again, there's so many others I could have said. All right, so next up is Death. And Death actually has one that I think has a lot of potential that isn't used and could be used, and that is Beguile. Now, if you don't actually know what this spell is Beguile can target an enemy and then turn them to your side for a round. Now, what this does is it makes it so that they cannot physically target you with spells. They will target their teammates, but they also can potentially blade you, stuff like that. So you can see here what it did is it made him attack his teammate and me, which is incredibly funny, to be completely honest. So you can see here I can kind of see what they're doing, kind of gauge that, whatever. Well, what I would like this spell to do, and what I think would be really cool, is if it's similar to what I proposed for minions. I think it would be really cool if you could physically control what they use from their hand and make it so that they actually use something that is worth using, right? So like potentially make it so that they blade you, or make it so that they attack their teammates. This would just make it slightly more useful, right? Like it would be slightly better than what Beguile currently is. I just think it would be genuinely interesting. I think this would add a layer to it and make it worth using in a lot of boss fights, right? If you're a Death, maybe use it on some of the major bosses that have like a major cheat or something. It would just be really helpful. So that's what I'll say, and that's what I'm going to say for Death. All right, so finally we have Balance, and I will say it is incredibly weird to be on my Balance again. It has been a hot minute since I've logged onto this, and it is also incredibly weird to be on 3 accounts at the same time. So that's definitely a thing, but let's talk about Balance. Now there's 2 main spells here that I wanted to bring up. The first, and as you'll see here, is Raw. Now the reason for this is, and the reason why I'm bringing this up, is the fact that Raw is almost definitely supposed to be stronger than Power Nova. It's something that should be stronger than Power Nova, but for some reason they changed it a while ago so that Raw does less damage but has that minus 45 weakness. And I will say, I understand. I think that yes, a weakness could be useful, but in PvE, where the main idea is to kind of kill things, it's just not that useful to have it be weaker than Power Nova, and it's significantly weaker than Power Nova. In almost every case, you're gonna want to use Power Nova. So I would definitely say that that is one that I always thought was weird, and I always kind of hated, because I think the design of Ra is really cool. It looks cool. Obviously, he's the sun god. It's just such a cool idea, and then instead we have to deal with this ball of fire, right? It's just not as cool of a spell, and it was really disappointing at the time when they changed it to be like that. So that is one, and how I'd recommend fixing it is just upping the damage a little bit and maybe minusing the weakness. Make it like a -30 or a -25 weakness, and make the damage around 700 or so. Maybe a little bit less than that. That is a little bit high for damage. Maybe make it around the same as Power Nova is now, and then lower Power Nova slightly. But the spell I'm actually going to talk about here, and what I wanted to talk about, is Gaze of Fate. And this is one that shouldn't surprise most people, because Gaze of Fate has really been kind of shot in the foot and nerfed into the ground. If you didn't know, Gaze of Fate used to be significantly better. It used to do a lot more damage, and used to be genuinely worth using. And I would say that it was genuinely worth using. But when they did the spell audit, they kind of changed it, so it is now this. So it does 325 balance damage and then 345 of a random damage. And it's not necessarily bad. It's just the fact that 600 base damage for a spell that is a shadow spell, a spell that is supposed to be ridiculously strong, is kind of really bad. I forgot I wasn't a member. And to put it into perspective, Ice's, which Ice is supposed to be naturally slightly weaker than Balance, if not on par with it, Ice's 5 pip shadow spell has 900 base damage, I believe. If not, it definitely has around 700 to 800, rather than, you know, the 600 here that is split up and not actually that good, I would say. So it's kind of just a disappointment that Gaze of Fate is so weak. I would say it's really easy. Just make it so that they each do around 400 or so, maybe 450 or so. Make it so that its base damage is 800, 900 rather than that 600. It would just be much better for the spell and Gaze of Fate as a whole. Make it worth using, you know? Because realistically, shadow spells already are kind of not worth using. So you take in the fact that they're not worth using, and then you put on top of it that it's already a bad spell. It's just never gonna work out. But that is it for today. I went over each of them. I hope you liked this style of video. I'm gonna have a lot of footage to cut out. This ended up being 35 minutes because I had to sign into 3 of my accounts and kind of change it up as I went, but I'm sure after I'm done, it'll be like 18 minutes or so. So hopefully it wasn't too long. Hopefully, you know, you liked it. But let me know what your spells you think are useless and need to be changed in the comments below. I'm very curious. But otherwise, thank you all for watching. I will see you in the next video. Adios.